Okay, let's dig into content marketing. So what is content marketing? Well, very simply, content marketing is just putting out free content in order to build your audience and your authority. The main point of content marketing is to give you something to share with the world that is not a constant sales message, because honestly, nobody wants to listen to you talk about yourself or your product all the time. And you know, when you do ask for their money, they're more likely to give it to you. By the way, I'm talking about your clients, because you've given them so much value for so long. It's this idea of giving, give before you ask. And here's a great example of this. So I frequent the Tim Ferriss podcast quite often. If you're not familiar with Tim Ferriss, he is a very popular writer, author, blogger, and has one of the most downloaded podcasts in the world. And Tim really focuses on distributing tons of free content all the time, including his podcast. So recently he put out a new book and he did something a little bit out of the ordinary, but I bet you it really worked for him. And here's what he did. He basically came on as a sort of disclaimer before his podcast started, one of the episodes, and he said, "Hey, this is Tim. I just want to let you know that I give tons of free content all the time. I never usually ask for anything, but I have this new book out and I would really appreciate it if you would check it out, if you would give it a purchase. It's not that expensive, and considering all the free content that I give you, hopefully you will find value in this book as well, because there really is some good stuff there." I personally listened to him. I bought the book, one, because I am very familiar with Tim's content. He does provide a lot of free value, and it's always good stuff. So if you can relate to that and understand that sort of sentiment, then I think then you should really connect with this idea of putting out content for the sake of giving well before you ever ask. So here are a couple common types of content marketing formats that you may want to know about if you aren't familiar. So things like blogs, podcasts, vlogs or video blogs, client profiles or case studies, putting out infographics or tutorials and how-tos, setting up an email newsletter. There's a ton more like this, but those are just some forms of content marketing that you could consider.
So one example that I like is our friend Mary Zimmer. So Mary teaches voice lessons for rock and metal singers. And the question is, how is she supposed to attract those people? Well, she does it in a way that I think is really smart. She puts out a bunch of tutorials on YouTube on how to scream in very specific ways. So this is stuff that I don't really think anybody else has out there on YouTube. So when you're searching for this or come across it, you see Mary and you go, wow, this is really interesting. I haven't seen anybody talk about this. If this free tutorial is so good, imagine how good the stuff she charges for must be. So that's how this thing works. That's how you give and then eventually you ask. So when it comes to content marketing, anything can work, but we highly suggest doing something that is based in video or audio, and I'll tell you why. Because the reality is that those things perform better than everything else. That's just how people are consuming their content these days. People just don't read as much as they used to. Yes, there are still popular bloggers, but most of them either built their following a long time ago or they have pivoted towards video and audio. As one example, Tim Ferriss, if you look at his blog now, almost every post is an embedded version of one of his podcasts. He's largely walked away from writing dedicated blog posts, probably because of everything that I just said. Now, all that being said, blogging is definitely better than doing nothing. So if that's really what you're passionate about, or if you're just afraid of doing anything else, then by all means start blogging. But we really suggest finding a way to do video or audio. Now, the most common objection to doing video or audio is, well, I hate the way I look in camera. I hate the sound of my voice. I get it, because I hate that stuff about myself too. I hate watching myself on video. I hate listening to the sound of my voice, but it's just something you got to do if you're really serious about that stuff. However, there is a hack. You can actually do pretty effective video without ever appearing on camera. As an extreme example of this, consider this guy, Avinash Parker. So look at this After Effects tutorial with 462,000 views. Now, what's interesting about this video is just a screen capture from After Effects, and all the text is text to speech. So you can have, the computer read your words like a GPS. That's what he did on this, and yet he still got 462,000 views on this thing. So you don't ever even have to appear in the video. Another way to do this, like a lot of YouTubers do this, like one guy I like, Nick Strength and Power, he's a bodybuilding YouTuber. Every one of his videos is just a slideshow of, basically does bios of these different bodybuilders. It's just a slideshow of images with his voiceover commentary behind it. He's just reading it off a piece of paper. So again, he never appears in the video. You do hear his voice, but he never has to get in front of the camera, and yet he still has several 100,000 followers. So the point is, audio and video does the best, and you do not necessarily even have to appear in front of the camera. Now, why would you do content marketing? So you can probably already think of the obvious reasons, which are to grow your audience. You get lots of subscribers, then you have people that will listen to what you're saying. And you can also think of another obvious benefit, which is thought leadership. In other words, establishing yourself as an expert in a given field. But there can still be a ton of value in content marketing, even if you don't have a huge audience. Those other kinds are really all about building up an audience, but it doesn't have to be about audience. There's a non-obvious reason which not too many people talk about, and that is that making this kind of content is an amazingly good way of building up your network. Now let's go through both of those things and unpack a little bit how they work. So building your authority, aka thought leadership. Now this is a great way to build your brand and break out from the national to international level. You hear this a lot. People say, well, I'm doing pretty well in my city. How do I get on the radar of national clients? This is potentially a great way to do it, assuming that you're ready for it. You should never act like you're an expert when you aren't. Now an example of how this could work, like let's say you put out a tutorial or advice video and it gets shared around everybody in your industry, like if you make videos and every videographer in your industry is sharing this around Facebook, what do you think that does to your perceived value in the eyes of potential clients? Obviously it goes way up. Now, if they've seen your video shared 1,000 times, then they're going to be way more likely to reply to a cold email. So if you reach out to them and say, hey, so-and-so, I make video, I'd love to work with you guys. If they've seen your video a bunch of times, then they'll go, oh, hey, I've seen your stuff. Yeah, let's talk. And you can also turn that into like speaking gigs, teaching workshops, any other kind of stuff like that if you're interested in it. So one example of that is this guy, Will Patterson, who's got 216,000 subscribers. He makes a lot of these videos about design trends, like this one, 5 huge graphic design trends in 2018. Now, by virtue of having 216,000 subscribers and 6-figure view counts on all his videos about graphic design trends, I would say he can very credibly claim to be an expert on design trends. And now he has done that through content marketing.
So one of the biggest other things with content marketing is building relationships. And I think this is probably the most overlooked benefit of content marketing vehicles like podcasts and blogs, because it gives you a way to talk to people who would otherwise be really, really hard to reach. So take, for example, a creative director that's really, really popular, really famous, or someone that works at a big company in your vertical. She or he probably won't take your call or have a meeting with you if you say, hey, let's go get coffee. I'd love to pick your brain. But they will likely take your call if you reach out to them and say, hey, I have this podcast. It reaches a ton of designers. And as a creative director, I would love to have you on my podcast to talk to you more in depth. So with that in mind, if you can get them on the podcast, now you get at least most likely an hour or more to talk to them, to ask questions. And if you hit off a good relationship, then it can go pretty far from there. The brilliant thing about this is, and the benefit is that it doesn't matter whether or not you have a large audience or if you just have a small audience. It's a great opportunity to give someone a chance to talk about themselves, to talk about what they do. And even the biggest thought leaders out there preach this all the time. Take every gig you can, take advantage of any kind of interview for the most part that you can, be on any podcast you can, because no podcast or blog is too tiny for something like this. People consume information this way all the time now, and just giving these people a platform to talk about what they do is really great. I mean, think about the last time someone asked you to talk about yourself and what you do. You probably jumped at that opportunity. And no matter what level you're at, you're probably going to be attracted to having that opportunity again.
So one example of this is a design podcast I like a lot, Mark Brickey from the band The Enkindles, if anybody out there remembers them. This is a great example of how this works in action. He got the creative director for Adidas on his show. Now, with all due respect to Mark, I don't think that this guy's going to take Mark's calls if he says, "Hey, I'm Mark Brickey, I'm a graphic designer, I'd love to sit down with you." But if he says, "I have one of the world's leading graphic design podcasts, would you like to come on?" Boom. Now he has an hour with this guy whose time is very, 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 very hard to get. So when should you do content marketing? There's a few boxes that you'll want to check before you decide that you want to do content marketing. First is if you can do it yourself. You don't want to pay somebody else to do this stuff. A, it's way too expensive because making media takes a lot of time, and B, they probably won't do it right because, as we've said, nobody knows or cares about your business as much as you do. Next box you want to check is that you should be passionate about it. This stuff is a lot of work, so don't just do it because you feel like you should do it. Do it because you think it's fun. If you're not passionate about it, it's going to show, and then it's pointless. There's no point in putting out soulless content that nobody's going to engage with. And then third, if you are good at content or you want to be good at content, putting out a lot of subpar content is going to do more harm than good. Now, it's okay if you're not great at it when you start because nobody is great at something when they start, or at least very few of us are. So that's fine, but you do have to be willing to put in the work to become better or to hopefully become great. And then lastly, you've got to be willing and able to invest the time. It takes a lot of work to do this stuff, probably more than you think. As an example, your podcast is, Matt has a podcast called Chocolate Croissants. It's about an hour long. And how much time would you say that goes into one of those?
Easily over 10 hours a week between myself and my partners. And it's everything from, initially planning what kind of content we want to discuss or what kind of topics we want to dig into, booking the guests and hoping that their schedule lines up. Then once we actually record the podcast, which typically takes anywhere between 90 minutes to 2 hours, then we have to get the sound right. So we have to edit the sound and get it mastered and mixed properly. We have to chop it up and pull the social pieces of it. We have to create imagery for it. It's a whole undertaking for sure. That if you don't have the time to allot for it, you probably won't do that great of a job with it. So I even think we could do better. So
yep. And if you don't put in the time, if you only put in a little bit of the time, you're going to be bummed at the results. So just know what you're signing up for. So a couple closing thoughts here. As always, with everything we talk about in this course, you need to have a plan and a goal for how and why you're going to be using content marketing. Do not just do it because you think you should, because it sounds cool. You got to have a plan going into it. Again, any kind of content can work, but we really highly suggest audio or video. And be genuine. So if you are going to use this as a way to bring new people into your network to build relationships, don't be a star fucker. Don't bring people on purely because you want to get something out of them. Don't disguise a sales pitch as a podcast conversation. People will not like that. And don't pretend to be an expert when you're not. So do this stuff, but be genuine about it. And lastly, this works in great combination with the stuff in our advanced social media section, which is coming up a little bit later in this course. So if this is interesting to you, make sure you watch that part as well, because these things go really well together. Now, it is time for the action items. So open up that workbook and ask yourself a couple of the following questions and follow along. So if you want to do content marketing, first, what are your strengths? Is it writing? Is it being on camera? Is it having great conversations with people? List those out. And then second, what are the formats that you think your audience will most engage with? Map out all of those and then combine the two, and that will give you kind of a direction about what sort of content might be a fit for you. And then use the GST framework to come up with a plan, like really get into detail about how doing this stuff is going to help you achieve your overall goal. So hopefully that helps. You can always ask us more about this in the Facebook group. I really love content marketing and I would love to talk to you more about it. So if you've got any questions for us, hit us up in there and we'll be happy to help.